Amy Burness from CyberArk's marketing team, and on behalf of CyberArk, I'd like to thank you for joining us today to learn more about how your organization can secure sensitive health data via locking down identity and privileged access. Today we have two panelists, which I'll introduce shortly. It'll be Adam Bosnian, who will kick off the session, and Jeremy Sutherland, who will jump in about midway to cover some use cases and also to take a closer look at our combined technologies. We will have a few minutes at the end of the session to address any questions you have, so please feel free to add those into the Q&A box. The session is recorded, and we will email it to everyone who has registered. And now for the brief introductions. Jeremy Sutherland is a Senior Product Manager for Identity IQ at SailPoint. During his tenure, he has worked on just about every aspect of the product, so he knows it very well. In his role, he focuses on technology integrations, including the one that SailPoint has with CyberArk. Prior to SailPoint, he has worked in healthcare consulting, and he specialized in physician alignment and health system identity management. Adam is he's the Executive Vice President of Global Business Development, responsible for managing and expanding global strategic relationships that we have with various technology partners on behalf of CyberArk. As an early member of the management team, he has led the industry to define the market for privileged access security and compliance. He is a frequent speaker at industry events, so there's a good chance you have crossed paths with Adam along the way. With that, I'm going to, forgot to show you the picture so you can see who's presenting today. And now I'm going to turn it over to Adam.
Thank you very much, Amy. I appreciate the great introduction and really excited to be here presenting with Jeremy and with SailPoint because CyberArk and SailPoint have been doing a lot of really good work over the last 3 or 4 years in bringing privilege and governance together and bringing the power of that to the enterprise and really looking forward to speaking about it today, specifically about how it really can help the healthcare industry. Because we know the healthcare industry has really been changing over the last decade, and it continues to evolve at a very rapid pace. In recent years, we've seen the increased adoption of new technologies with the digitization of health data, the growing demand for data sharing and interconnectivity, and what this has done to enable data access for a very diverse user population that collaborates from a variety of locations. And when you have that type of diverse user population, there's obviously all the access challenges that come with that as well. So, of course, with that change, especially ones that are as dramatic as what we're seeing in healthcare, comes those new challenges. You know, with the healthcare provider organizations having that diverse audience with various levels of requirements for access rights to the wide spectrum of modern and legacy applications, as well as the adoption of cloud and on-premise technology, when you think about it, it becomes easy to imagine that over 1 million points of access for a healthcare organization may be reality for them to have to deal with. When these points of access can easily become points of exposure, and that's why we talk about it from 1 million points of exposure. And when we look at it from the attacker perspective, we're really seeing that attack surface continuing to grow. So not only is there this very wide user population, we also have a lot more things that are being utilized in today's modern environment. You know, certainly the adoption of cloud. We're seeing application delivery and DevOps and automation happening in that area, and new actors in those areas. Certainly the Internet of Things and medical devices and medical systems within the environment, and all the different types of automation that happen within an organization. Robotic process automation and automating manual processes brings not only a greater number of things that need to be controlled, but a greater diversity of types of things that need to be controlled, and a greater user population that needs to be controlled. And what happens is the attack surface continues to grow and to grow and to grow. And what SailPoint and CyberArk are here to do is to try to help organizations better get their hands around that. Now, what we've been seeing is certainly growth in terms of the number of compromised health records growing 2.5 times year over year, which is obviously very significant. The conversation about it being external attackers actually started to shift inside, where now more organizations, almost 80% of organizations, view insiders as an equal or greater threat than outside attacks. Actually, once someone gets inside the four walls of the organization, they're all an insider, right? And then we have 20% of health employees willing to sell sensitive data to unauthorized parties. And this comes from a variety of different types of surveys and analyst reports that are out there. And what ends up becoming really clear when you start to look at that expanding types of users and access requirements and that expanding attack surface is that we really need to have governance of digital identities as central to any security strategy. The days of security and identity being separate conversations are in the past, and identity and security need to be thought of together, and governance of those digital identities needs to become really front and center of the security strategy moving forward. So when we start to look at the reasons for that, it becomes very clear that identity is at the center of a range of different types of use cases, whether it's the user population within that healthcare provider organization, ranging from staff to non-employed staff to partners, contractors, volunteers. You have a wide range of different types of users, and yet we need to be able to give them the right access at the right time, whether they're employees or not employees, vendors, remote or not remote. We need to deal with a wide range of different regulations that are out there. Traditionally, HIPAA has obviously been the core driver, but with GDPR and with the emergence of other privacy regulations happening in the states, California, and now the U.S. starting to look at these across, looking at it from a federal perspective. We've talked about the number of users, we've talked about the diversity and the growth and the number of targets, but when we start to think about the amount of data that's being created and the ever-growing volume of that data and all the different areas that that data ends up being stored and accessed, identity and controlling access to those different data stores becomes critical. Something near and dear to CyberArk's heart, securing privileged access accounts, right? Not only are these users people who may need to look at the data, maybe they're the people who are managing the underlying infrastructure. Maybe they're the users who are managing the access to Epic or managing access to the data lake to do the analytics. Those are really privileged and very powerful types of usages out there that need to have special security and governance put on them. Or maybe it's an application that needs access to the data, and now we're needing to manage a non-human identity and make sure that that's secured, controlled, and reportable for my HIPAA and my GDPR and privacy regulations. When we start talking about the cloud, not only are many applications in the cloud, I need to be able to deliver secure access to that cloud environment and deal with all the different types of users that are accessing all of this data and these entities in their different personas, right? I may be accessing this system as a power user. I may be accessing this other system as a consumer of the data. I shouldn't have the same rights in both areas. And we're trying to do all of these things while at the same time really working to make access decisions and provisioning of access simple, easy, automated, and optimized for the hospital workflow. So we see that identity is really critical and at the center of a range of different use cases out there, which is why we really highlight the importance of governance of digital identities. Now, when we look at it from what the attacker is really doing, we're seeing the attackers going after the identities. That's what they're really working, whether they're working to use that to get inside the organization, or it's someone who's inside the organization leveraging their identity to go and move around and try to increase their privileges. So no longer is the conversation, how did the bad guy get in? The conversation is, how did the bad guy get the power to do what they needed to do to actually be able to perpetrate that attack, whether that attack is gathering data and publishing data, whether that is trying to take money, whether it's trying to control a system. At the end of the day, all of the different types of attacks that you see up here really follow the same process. Someone is on a system inside the organization. They try to move to an adjacent system, gain more power, more privileges, continue to move, try to, a memory scrape, whatever the different approaches they're trying to take, their goal is to increase their power and privilege and capabilities into the organization until they have enough to be able to perpetrate the end goal of that attack. And each one of the examples up here really articulate that. So the challenge that we end up talking a lot about is that in most organizations today, and we're really glad to see most organizations adopting both privilege access management, which is what CyberArk does, and governance within their organization, which is what SailPoint does. But what we find in most organizations is that these PAM implementations and the governance deployments are really operating independently today. And when they're operating independently, there's a range of different challenges that come up from that, right? The biggest one in my mind is increased dormant or orphan privileged accounts. I often talk about a book that was written back in the late 80s about a nation-state attack coming into a university, and what they were using were orphaned accounts that still existed, but there were no longer anyone who owned them, so no one really knew they existed, and yet they had all the power to be able to traverse and do whatever needed to be done in the environment. So we have more increased dormant and orphaned accounts, orphan privileged accounts, when you're not bringing privilege and governance together. Privilege entitlement creep, I think, is something that's talked about a great deal as someone moves from role to role or persona to persona. They should only have the privileges for what that role or that persona requires. It should not be additive. It should only be for what they have. And yet, we see many times that when I move from role A to role B, I end up having the privileges of both role A and role B, or persona A and persona B. Very often we do see erroneous provisioning of privilege access out there. Someone was given access because they ended up being put in a group that had the privilege access, but they shouldn't have had all the privilege access that was provided in that area. We absolutely see a lack of centralized visibility, auditing, and reporting, right? We have lots of really great privilege information in CyberArk. Who, what, when, where, why, how of privilege access and activities. But if we don't provide that back up into the governance platform of SailPoint, then the organization doesn't see everything that Adam has access to and all of the entitlements that Adam has access to, and can't do the right access reviews, certifications, deprovisionings as necessary, etc. When the solutions aren't brought together, we have really no automation of related processes. We do provisioning things in CyberArk. Certainly SailPoint drives a lot of provisioning. Bringing these two things together can help us do that more seamlessly in both directions, both provisioning and deprovisioning, and even doing it in a just-in-time manner. And very often we also see a loss of productivity, people waiting to access a privileged system. They may make an access request, but then that access request ends up having to be manually implemented, whereas as you start to bring these solutions together, then we can start to see that all automated. So those are all core reasons why SailPoint and CyberArk started working together over 4 years ago to bring together what each one of us does specifically for an organization. Value 1, CyberArk does privilege access security. Value 2, SailPoint does governance. But when you bring value 1 and value 2 together and you have identity, governance, and privilege, you have value, extrapolated. Value 1 plus 1 equals 11 is what I always talk about. So we've really been working together over the last 4 years to bring the powers of identity, governance, and privilege access security together to be able to address the challenges that we outlined before, but also to address a range of challenges that organizations may face in their specific and custom environment. One of the other reasons why we like to work together is we're both the leaders in our respective areas. CyberArk is the leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, in the Forrester Wave, and Temperature Control Cole, sorry. We are the leaders in the privileged access management, access security space, and SailPoint has for a long time been the demonstrated leader in the identity governance space, being identified in the leader quadrant with Gartner, with Forrester Wave, and Cooper & Cole. These are the three major analyst firms that are out there in the U.S. and EMEA, and they're identifying CyberArk and SailPoint as leaders. That's really core reasons why we want to work together. So that combined solution provides an integrated, policy-driven approach to managing identity and access governance across all kinds of users, non-privileged and privileged users. And I think that's really the critical piece here, knowing what Adam's rights are across all types of usage, personas, and targets. Adam has these rights as his normal user. He also has these rights as a privileged user and has these entitlements as a privileged user on these systems. Is that the universe of rights that Adam should have, or how do we start to bring them down? You can only visualize that and control that when you bring SailPoint and CyberArk together within the environment. So that when you do bring them all together, you now are able to have that complete view of Adam or whoever the user is across all of their personas and user base, including even the ones that don't have a heartbeat, those applications I talked about before. So really giving that complete view of both privileged and non-privileged users. We're able to automate the governance controls. Decisions can be made at the SailPoint level and then implemented automatically throughout the environment with CyberArk as the control point for that privileged user. We're able to centralize and streamline the secure delivery of access, go and make that access request. SailPoint is able to confirm that they have the rights to that, and then is able to instruct CyberArk to provision that capability for the user to that target system. And then CyberArk is able to provide that same information back upstream to say Adam has these rights, here's what Adam has been doing, and by being able to have that information flowing upstream, we're able to now together better identify and act on threats together as a cohesive solution rather than as two independent solutions that aren't integrated or working together within the environment. Jeremy, off to you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adam. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the solution in a little bit more detail. Right, so the joint solution provides a unified single pane of glass view with a centralized policy-based identity governance for all identities and access entitlements across the enterprise. Right, so the CyberArk Privileged Access Security solution integrated with SailPoint's Identity IQ Privileged Account Management module provides a unified view with centralized policy-based identity management for all identities, including those identities with privilege. And so this refers to both individuals or humans or applications like bots, and access entitlements to maintain a high level of security and ensure both access policy and regulatory compliance. The integration itself leverages the System for Cross-Domain Identity Management, or SCIM, server technology that provides an open standard for extensibility to meet a vast array of use cases, both today and in the future. Right, so what does the SailPoint and CyberArk combination do, and what value does it provide? By integrating these two best-of-breed solutions, we're able to extend the core business value and functions of identity governance to cover privileged access security managed accounts. This includes complete visibility over all users' access, including privileged accounts. Visibility is the cornerstone of governance. You can only govern what you can see, and being able to see all digital access, including privileged, in a single spot is incredibly valuable. Consistent application of governance controls across all privileged accounts, access requests, reviews, and so on can now be initiated, reviewed, enforced, and audited all in the same location with consistent controls, which improves not only security posture and increases efficiency, but it also reduces the administrative overhead previously burdened with managing both of these very powerful solutions independently. So let's talk a little bit about the specific use cases that we're solving together. So the most sought after pain point that privileged access security customers and Identity IQ customers have is the ability to provide a unified view into a user's access. With the integration, now there's complete visibility into all user access, aggregating safe content and allowing administrators to quickly search for who has access within the larger context of an end user's entire digital access portfolio. Regulations like SOX, HIPAA, and others require that access is regularly reviewed, certifying that users have access to the right things. Here at SailPoint, our belief is that the manager is in the best position to determine whether or not her direct report's access is appropriate. As an example, my manager is already reviewing my access on a regular basis to applications like Workday, Office 365, Jira, and so on, right? And so with this integration, he can now review my privileged access to safes at the same time within the same context. Additionally, application owners can certify that all identities accessing applications for which a user is responsible for have the proper entitlements and safes associated. And just to talk a little bit about lifecycle management. So lifecycle management is really the idea that as an individual affiliated with an organization, you have a start date. And on that start date, there's certain access points that you need to be able to do your job. And being able to quickly get access to those things that you need to do your job is really fundamental in sort of the onboarding process with any new organization, right? And so being able to include not only your access to Epic or Workday or other applications like that, but privileged access to privileged account access, your access to privileged entitlements as well within that joiner lifecycle. That joiner workflow is really important. Now, like Adam mentioned, right, individuals change roles, change personas over the lifetime of their relationship within an organization, and so too should the underlying processes to make sure that that access, the appropriateness of that access is maintained, right? So as an identity or as an individual changes jobs within the organization, so too should your identity management and your privileged access security solution be able to work in place together to make sure that that access is updated. And then finally, whenever an identity leaves the organization, you want to make sure that that identity's access is automatically revoked to all target systems, including sort of the regular standard access and privileged access as well. So talking a little bit about policy management, right? So establishing consistent governance controls to enforce user access policies and identify violations such as separations of duties is really, really important, right? These policies now can, with Identity IQ with SailPoint and CyberArk, these policies can evaluate both traditional application access and privileged access all within the same policy, allowing you to create and solve for advanced use cases to avoid toxic combinations regardless of the access type or access classification. The unification and centralization of access certifications driven from these policy violations help to mitigate risk of over-entitled users. The next use case I want to talk about is credential cycling. And so going back to visibility, right? The ability, like I said, the ability to see all digital access is incredibly important. And the fundamental mechanism to see that access really involves connecting to target systems, whether that's Epic or whether it's Concur or SAP. Being able to connect to these systems to pull in the accounts and the rights that users have on these systems, right? And so that pulling in information requires credentials, more often than not managed in CyberArk, to allow SailPoint to connect to these target systems, pull in the appropriate information. And so what this integration is really doing is at runtime, SailPoint is saying, okay, well, we need to do an aggregation from Epic. We're going to reach out to Epic, and Epic's going to say, hey, wait a second, we need credentials. we're going to automatically reach out to CyberArk, retrieve the credentials that are stored and managed and enforced and maintained by CyberArk, retrieve those credentials, pass them back up through Epic. We're going to do our aggregation thing. And then once we're done with our process, we're going to discard those credentials, right? This greatly reduces the effort required to maintain these privileged credentials in 2 different places. And it also, as an added benefit, tends to make auditors very happy. And so just to hit home the benefits again, right? Together, CyberArk's privileged account security integrated with SailPoint's Identity IQ provides a unified single pane of glass with centralized policy identity governance for all identities, including privileged identities and access entitlements across the entire enterprise. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions for Adam and I.
This is Amy again. I just remind everyone to go ahead and add any questions you have into the Q&A box. I see a couple in there, and feel free to continue to add them as we start to address them. And this could be answered by either Adam or Jeremy, but a question is about, do you have, or how have some companies started with this integration?
Jeremy, if it's okay, I'll start on this one. I think that when we talk about bringing privilege and identity governance together, people immediately say, yes, I want that. The challenges that you told me about are certainly things that we experience in our organization, but gee whiz, that can seem like it's a big project. And frankly, it's not a big project. It's simple to bring the products together. But what we're seeing some companies do is look for lower hanging fruit use cases that allow them to get started along the journey of bringing privilege and governance together. We were talking with one organization where they had a lot of service accounts being managed by CyberArk, but didn't have a really good view of all of those service accounts, the status of those service accounts, what was actually being logged in by, et cetera. And when we showed them the integration between CyberArk and SailPoint, and they were able to see all the service account usage and the review and the visibility within SailPoint, they said, that's what we want. And so it was a very simple use case, better reporting around service accounts, but by getting the data flowing from CyberArk into SailPoint, they were able to address that basic use case while at the same time taking their first step along bringing privilege and identity together. I think there's other kinds of those lower hanging fruit use cases. We've had some people talk about it from a just-in-time access perspective. I want to be able to have my users go request access within SailPoint, but have CyberArk provided almost in a temporary or ephemeral way. We can do those things behind the scenes, but the key part is getting the data connection between CyberArk and SailPoint and getting that implemented the first time, and then all of these other use cases can be leveraged. And so find one of those in your environment, start there, and then you can expand.
Okay. Jeremy, anything to add to that, or next question?
Let's go to the next question. Adam answered it perfectly.
All right. Next question is, where is the ownership of privileged accounts maintained?
Where is the ownership of privileged accounts maintained in an organization? It may be in the organization or in the product, but let's talk about it in both ways, and maybe, Jeremy, you can jump in. We very often, CyberArk works a lot with the security side of the organization, sometimes the identity side, but certainly with the security side and identity. But when we bring the products together, really, our commentary is to say you, as the person running SailPoint, are the ones who can determine who ends up having access, whether it's privileged or non-privileged access, within the environment. So by bringing the solutions together, that may allow you to better centralize the granting of the access to the people who have access to the SailPoint platform. But Jeremy, maybe you have something to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. From a ownership perspective, And I think what this question was maybe alluding to is ownership is very fundamental to governance, right? You need to have someone who's ultimately responsible for it. And so, luckily, with this integration, we're able to basically assign that ownership, just like you would a role or a group or any other entitlement within SailPoint, and apply governance strategies around that ownership of these safes and privileged accounts.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll move to the next question. Does this, I guess it's referring to the integration, have a full audit trail for all privileged access and permissions? And what about extensive logging and reports as well as an integration into other systems? Maybe we could break that up a little bit.
Yeah, so I think we're going to break that up into two, and I'll let Jeremy talk about, as the data flows from CyberArk into SailPoint, all the good things that can happen there. But CyberArk is the repository for all the privileged information, who has access, what they've done, et cetera. And we can share that information obviously up into SailPoint, but we also share that into SIM, into SOAR type systems, other analytic systems, et cetera. But CyberArk ends up being the repository for that information, and then it gets shared from there. Certainly lots of auditing and detailed transactional information is certainly kept within CyberArk and can also be shared up. But in terms of how the reporting gets done, maybe, Jeremy, that's something that you could speak about in terms of bringing this data into SailPoint, and now goodness can happen from there from a reporting and attestation perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So all events surrounding our use of the data that we're pulling over from CyberArk is certainly audited. So we allow for provisioning, deprovisioning, attestation. All of those type of governance activities are fully and completely audited on our side and available in our reports and advanced analytics within our products.
Maybe one more?
I think this question is about the integration. How long does it take to implement?
Jeremy, you want to take that one? I think there's some elements that you said.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just heard of an integration yesterday, talking with our services folks, and so we have a very, very good working relationship with both with sort of both sides of the fence, right? With with SailPoint and with CyberArk. This latest customer fully implemented all of the capabilities of the PAM module. It took about 2 weeks.
And I think that not only is there really good alignment with the SailPoint and the CyberArk organizations and our services organizations, but we have very many of the same partners, services delivery partners, whether they're the large advisory organizations or the regional identity players or even some of the value-added resellers, and they have experience in implementing as well. So they may have different approaches or timelines on that. But the idea that we've tried to do with the SCIM integration is to leverage not only a standards-based integration approach, but to make it simple for the organization to get the data flowing. And then putting use cases around that, those are things that you'll be customizing within your environment above and beyond what we deliver out of the box, but those obviously would be germane to your specific environment and use cases.
Okay, thank you. Any final comments? Looks like that's the end of our questions.
I'll just finish from the CyberArk side and just say that this has been a very strong, not only a strong relationship, but it's really been something that's had very good impact with our customers, and looking forward to have that spreading into the healthcare industry, because at the end of the day, having the governance level of SailPoint and the controls and granular controls of CyberArk and bringing them together really brings two very powerful solutions to bear to address a wider set of challenges within an organization. So we're very glad to be working closely with SailPoint. Jeremy?
Yeah, and just to reiterate what Adam said, I mean, I think both companies can provide a very unique value proposition whenever our two solutions are combined. Certainly, many verticals just across the large enterprise. And so, I mean, as you guys sort of get further along in your journey, please reach out to us with any questions or any ideas that you have. We'd love to sit down and dig into those more and try to come up with ways in which we can help you solve your problems.
Thank you both. I appreciate the preparation and dialogue you both shared today. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, the session is recorded. We will share that with everyone who registered using the email you used for registration, and certainly you can find more information on either one of our websites. So thank you, and have a good day.